Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I want to share with you 2 tips to know when to EQ and when to compress and which plugin should come first in your chain. We're going to be talking plugin order and plugin strategy today, but before we dive in, if you are ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process as a whole and really start to hone your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the thing for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's just a simple PDF that will walk you through the entire mixing process step by step to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without any more of the guesswork and without any more of the hassle. It is a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and talk about when to EQ and when to compress. Tip number 1 for figuring out when to EQ or when to compress is to take into consideration tone versus volume. If you are looking to shape the tone of a sound, you want to EQ first. If you are looking to shape the volume of a sound, then you want to compress first. So, for example, we're going to look at our bass guitar here in this mix. You can see I have an EQ first before compressing. This is because I wanted to change the sound, the shape of the instrument before I compressed it. I wanted it to be even. We want to compress our bass guitar, right? Like most of our instruments here, kick and snare, we want them to be even and punching up front, but I wanted to change the shape of the sound, the tone of the sound first on the front end. That to me means I want to EQ first. If I compress first, I'm going to be pushing all of these ugly frequencies into the compressor, and it's going to react differently than if I didn't have all these frequencies in here. So, for example, let me take off this last EQ here because that's not relevant at the moment. Just this EQ and just this compressor. Listen to how our compressor changes and our tone changes overall with and without this EQ. So if I were to just compress the sound first versus if I were to EQ the sound first. So we'll leave our EQ in, you can hear what it sounds like, and then I will pull out our EQ and you can hear what it would have sounded like if we were to have compressed first. Couple things to take into account here. Without the EQ in, we get so much more of this mid-range and low-mid information coming from our bass guitar, and we lose so much more low-end than if we were to have this EQ in first. So I wanted to shape or change the sound of this instrument, change its tone, so I EQ first. That way, when I put my compressor in, I don't end up with a worse sound than I started with. This way, after I put my compressor in, I'm not fighting the effects of the compressor because it's doing what I want it to rather than emphasizing frequencies that I need to get rid of here. Especially low-mid frequencies, doing even 3 to 5 dB compression will often emphasize low-mid frequencies. So if you have a problem in the low-mids, you want to get rid of that before you send it into a compressor. And low-end is always going to get compressed a lot heavier than top-end, especially on bass guitar like this or on kick drum. The low-end is a big driving force in the sound. So if I didn't have this high-pass filter in to reduce all that sub-information, all of that's going to push into the compressor and drive it harder, and I'm not going to get the even tone that I want. It's going to be focusing on compressing the low end, while the top end's still going to be jumping all around when he hits notes harder or digs in or goes up higher on the neck. It's not going to be as even and consistent with the compressor than it would be if I put this in, right? So we're shaping our tone before we're shaping our volume. Now, on the other hand, if you just want to shape the volume of a sound and then work EQ-wise, then you want your compressor first. So if my bass guitar was sounding pretty good, there wasn't a bunch of sub-information, it wasn't nosy in the mid-range, then I could put my compressor on, get it even, and then boost my low end and top end from there. But there were some frequencies that I needed to get rid of, and I wanted to shape the tone before I started to even out the volume. So that's our tip number one here, is to take into consideration tone versus volume. What are you looking to shape and what do you want to change? Tip number two is boosting low end versus top end. For me, I always like to boost low end post compression, and I like to boost top end pre-compression. I like the way compression handles top end boosts. I've never been a fan of the way compressors handle low end boosts. So for this here, we're going to take a look at our kick drum here. There's a couple other ways I implement this in the mix, and you can see it's there on the bass guitar too, as well as it's probably on the vocal here. As well, you can see there's EQs after my compressor. That's for this reason here. So when you boost low end into a compressor, when you push any kind of low end into a compressor, it's going to fight that harder than it fights the top end information, especially on things like kick drum and bass guitar. So here on my kick drum, I'm not doing any low end boosts before the compressor. I'm boosting my low end after the compressor. So I get my sound even and then bring up the low end, which helps the low end stay consistent and stay powerful. If I boost low end into my compressor, the compressor is just going to fight that low end harder and pull it back even more. So we're going to drive our compressor way too hard because it's going to be fighting all this low end we're pushing into it, and it's going to squash the sound. That's not what we want. We want the low end to bloom, we want it to be big, and you want it to be powerful. This is why you boost low end after the compressor, or why I boost low end after the compressor. I'm sure there's times you want to push low end into your compressor if that's the sound you're going for. But for me, if I want my low end to be powerful and I want it to be consistent, I always boost it post compression. On the flip side, I love the way compressors handle pushing top end into them. So on the same instrument here, same kick drum, I boost, you can see how much top end we're boosting into the compressor. 24 dB at 8K, that's a huge boost. But for me, it doesn't change the compression tone. It doesn't change those settings too much, boosting top end into the compressor. On the flip side, low end will drastically change the amount of compression you're getting. So let's take a listen here to our kick drum. This is just with our first EQ in. I'm going to take these boosts out here. I'm going to put the compressor in. I want you to notice how our sound changes just putting our compressor in post EQ here. When we put the compressor in, we lose some low end because that's our fundamental frequency on this. So if I were to start boosting low end here, let's take a listen to what happens. I'm boosting like 10 dB of low end, and we're not getting so much more low end power. We're just driving our compressor harder. You could see it was doing like 14 dB of compression. That's crazy amount of compression. And we're not getting the low end that we want, even though we're drastically boosting the low end here. That's why afterwards we add our low end boost. So now look, we're only doing 7 dB boost here in the low end, but listen to how much more power we get from this boost here, post compression. Hear how much more powerful, it's pretty much like half of the boosting we were doing into the compressor. After the compressor, you don't have to boost as much to get the energy you want because it's not being clamped down by the compressor. We've evened out our tone overall with our compression, and now we can boost up that low end and it'll be consistent and it'll be powerful. Now let's move to the top end here. I like to boost top end into compression because it's not going to change the compression that much. It's not going to push so much harder into the compression, but it's going to give it a nice tone here. So I like to do this on kick drum and I like to do it on vocals here. Let me throw just these two boosts in on kick drum, and I want you to pay attention to how the compressor adds that extra attack. So boosting the high end into the compressor gives us more attack and gives us more snap on our kick drum. You can see it's still 8.5 dB of compression with and without these two boosts in the top end. And we're doing 24 dB at 8K. So it's not drastically changing the amount of compression we're doing, but it's changing the tone in a way that I like. The other example of this, let me show you, is with our lead vocal here. Vocals are something I do these same kind of tactics on. If we take a look at our lead vocal here, you can see I'm boosting top end into the compressor and then boosting low end post compression. So I don't want to boost low mids into my compressor, especially a compressor like this FET style compressor. 1176 style compressor is going to emphasize that low mid area, that 200, 300 hertz area. So I'm going to cut that before the compression. That's our cut here, about 1.5 dB cut at 300 hertz. That's to make sure we're sending a nice clean signal into our compressor. And I can boost top end into the compression to get that nice grit and that nice air coming through on our vocal. And then afterwards, when I want more weight on my vocal, I can add that afterwards because I've got an even and consistent vocal tone that I can bring up some low end without it jumping out on words or disappearing on other words. Take a listen here, and I'll A-B this last EQ for you, as well as these boosts going into the compressor.
Bitterest tears on my darkest fears, all the deeds that I left undone. Well, I'm haunted night and day by the words that I didn't say. Well, someone's gotta give. Bitterest tears on my darkest fears, all the deeds that I left undone. Well, I'm haunted night and day by the words that I didn't say. Well, someone's gotta give. Bitterest tears on my darkest fears, all the deeds that I left undone. Well, I'm haunted.
You can hear how much more consistent the low end is post compression rather than pre compression. Pushing that low end into the compressor doesn't give me the sound I'm looking for. It doesn't give me a bigger sounding vocal. It makes the vocal sound heavy and it makes it sound too thick and muddy sounding. That's not what I want. I want the vocal to have a nice amount of thickness and I want it to feel big, not heavy. I want it to feel big and powerful, and a little bit of low end goes a long way there after our compressor. And then the top end, I like pushing that into a compressor, especially into a FET style compressor like this. It's going to emphasize any kind of grit that you have. It's going to emphasize energy, and it's going to give you a nice air on the top end of your vocal. So quick review here. The two things or two tips to take into consideration on when to EQ and when to compress. Number one is tone versus volume. What are you looking to change? What are you looking to shape? If you want to shape tone first, you're going to EQ first. If you're looking to shape volume first, you want to compress first. And then the second thing to consider is boosting low end versus boosting top end. For me, I always want to boost low end post compression. That way I'm bringing up the low end of a consistent and even sound rather than having low end that's going to move all over the place. Top end, I like to push that into a compressor. I like the sound that you get from pushing 8K or 3K or top end into a compressor, especially again, a FET style compressor like this. It gives you nice energy boosts and nice air boosts, and it'll give you some emphasis on the attack of the instrument. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to take your mixes to the next level and really start dialing in your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.